There's always a lot of energy in the room when you bring together a bunch of educators and people committed to education. Good afternoon. My name is Harry Berman. I'm a member of the board of Advance Illinois. Now, my entire career was in higher education. Long time at the University of Illinois Springfield and then at the Illinois Board of Higher Education. So here's something to recognize about higher education in this day and age. Some form of post-secondary education continues to be the ticket for maximizing life chances. Not every young person needs to be on a path to a 4-year college degree, but every single one of them needs some form of post-secondary education. But sitting where I sat in that higher education world, it was abundantly clear that for people to be successful in post-secondary education, they have to be well prepared for post-secondary studies. And for them to be well prepared, they need to be growing academically and socially all through their earlier years. Yes, even going back to preschool. Success at earlier stages increases the likelihood of success at later stages. In Springfield, we call this way of thinking the Continuum of Learning. And that's the name of our collaboration among business leaders, philanthropic organizations, and education providers whose aim is to increase educational attainment in our region. Now, I serve on the Advance Illinois board because the vision of the Continuum of Learning that we have here in Springfield is baked into Advance Illinois' DNA. Advance Illinois wants to have the largest possible proportion of Illinois children to advance successfully through each grade and each stage of development, irrespective of their family's circumstances. That's what Advance Illinois is all about. So you'll hear more about Advance Illinois' focus on achievement and equity as we move through today's program. But first, I want to acknowledge some notable people in the room who've joined us this morning. I want to start, and I'd ask you to please hold your applause until I go through the list, and it's an extensive list. I want to acknowledge the presence of Mike Murphy, representative from the 99th District, Jolene Lauder, president of the Illinois PTA, Karen Hunter Anderson, former executive director of the Illinois Community College Board, Jim Applegate, former executive director of the Illinois Board of Higher Education, Cinda Klickner, past president of the Illinois Education Association, Dale Chapman, president of Lewis and Clark Community College. And I want to take the privilege of the microphone to acknowledge the presence of UIS's leadership team, Chancellor Cook, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Dr. Clarice Ford, Dr. Dennis Papini, Provost, and Dr. David Racine, head of the Center for State Policy and Leadership. And now, if you would, I'd appreciate it if all the superintendents in attendance this morning would please rise. Thank you. Thank you. And I do believe that we have some teachers and school leaders with us today. Would you please rise? Okay. All right. And anybody else who wasn't in any of those categories, please rise. Okay. Thank you all very much. Now, as lunch is being served, I would ask you to do this one thing, to introduce yourself to the other people at your table, your name, your organization, and this is particularly what we want to focus on. A young person or a school leader that you knew or who you knew in the past who inspired you to advance and to move forward the work around educational equity. So enjoy your lunch, and we'll be back to with you in a few minutes. Darren currently serves as Vice President of Programs and Strategy at the Joyce Foundation. Prior to serving at the Joyce Foundation, he worked for 7 years at the University of Chicago, most recently as Vice President for Strategic Initiatives and Deputy Provost. Prior to his service in that role, he worked with David Axelrod as the first executive director of the university's Institute of Politics. And if you're not familiar with it, the Institute of Politics is an outstanding organization that really energizes students and works with very bright students who see themselves as having futures in a positive way in politics and public service. From 2005 to 2012, Darren served as General Counsel and Deputy Superintendent of the Illinois State Board of Education, overseeing, among other areas, the agency's legal department and legislative affairs. He began his career in Chicago as an employment and labor attorney, after serving as a judicial law clerk for U.S. District Court Judge Rebecca R. Pallmeyer. Darren received his bachelor's degree in political science at Duke University, even though it wasn't from Illinois, we'll forgive him that, and earned his JD degree from Yale Law School. Darren was appointed as chair of the Illinois State Board of Education in February 2019 by Governor J.B. Pritzker. His term will expire in January 2023, and we're glad to have him in that role. Darren?
Thank you very much, Harry, for hosting us and for your service leading the Board of Higher Education and all else. Thank you to Advance Illinois for having me participate in this, and Robin for your leadership there. I think the work that Advance Illinois continues to do is incredibly instrumental in terms of our state making continued progress, which is what we're hoping to do with all of you. And thanks for being here, everybody. This is really a wonderful group, a lot of old friends, new ones as well, and it just makes me feel good about the future of the state. As Harry said, I did serve as general counsel at ISB, and it really is a privilege to be able to now be in this role as a member of the board. I know I have one of my board members from when I was at the agency there, Melinda Labar, back in the back of the room, and now I recognize how challenging it is to be a board member at the state. So thank you for having performed in that role. So I believe education, like all of you do, is the key to success and opportunity. And as Advance Illinois' report makes very, very clear, we have progress to celebrate, but also work to do, especially to close gaps before they get started and along the way. We owe every child an equal opportunity to learn and thrive. And the data you'll hear here today suggests we can do better at every stage. Now, the State Board of Education, as many of you know, recently released its own annual report card. That's a report card on the state and with information on every district and every school. I want to share a few highlights here. That will be the core of my brief remarks, but I want to encourage you to take a look, if and when you can, at illinoisreportcard.com, where you can dive a bit more deeply into the data. The data for 2019 shows historic increases in students taking and succeeding in rigorous college and career preparation courses, representing 4 years of continuous growth and reflecting Illinois' investments in equity and opportunity. As Robin will mention, Illinois now has its most racially and linguistically diverse student population in recent history, which amplifies our gains and proves that the right tools, given the right tools and support, all students can learn and thrive. The 2019 Illinois Report Card offers a new look at where dollars go within a school district. I know there was a lot of work done on the part of the State Board of Education staff in order to prepare for the school-specific financial data, and a lot of work done by school districts across the state in that regard as well. So thank you for all your work there. The report card displays spending at the school level for the first time. Exploring this new level of financial data in context can deepen understanding of equity in Illinois and inequity, and of the relationship between spending, student characteristics, and student outcomes. What our report shows is that evidence-based funding is making a difference. We have Senator Manar here, who is a champion of that work, working along with many of you. In fact, last night we had our third of 4 budget hearings for the State Board in Mount Vernon. We had a number of superintendents who are sitting right here come to that hearing to be able to, in wonderful detail, show what it actually means to receive the extra funding that they have through evidence-based funding. And even if it's the case that it's made the move towards adequacy increase by 3 or 4%, when you actually hear what that means in terms of on-the-ground support that the school districts have been able to add, it's supremely powerful. It's powerful information that we now want to make sure we're getting out across the rest of the state, getting out to the legislature in the spring, and hopefully seeing that the dollars that are being put into evidence-based funding continue to increase so we move that much more closely and quickly towards the adequacy goals. This means hiring additional teachers, social workers, and counselors, reducing class size, and investing in professional development, among many other things. Back to the report card, teacher diversity, retention, and attendance, as well as the total number of teachers in the state, showed slight upticks in 2019. While we know we've got more to do, we've seen some gains, as I mentioned before, in college and career readiness. Career and tech ed programs enrolled 285,000 students in 2019, an increase of nearly 5,000 students since 2016, despite declining student enrollment in schools across Illinois. Students in the 10th through 12th grades took a combined 169,217 dual credit, advanced placement, and IB courses in 2019. That's approximately 10,000 more than in 2016 when data collection began. Students recorded the highest ever pass rates on AP exams, even with the expansion in access among historically underrepresented student groups. The 2019 Illinois report card also marks the fourth consecutive year that the percentage of students needing to enroll in remedial courses at Illinois community colleges has declined. As Robin will note, we now have results also from the 2019 NAEP, the National Assessment. Illinois performance held steady in 2019. Of course, we'd like to see that increase. But 31 other states saw a significant decline in 8th grade reading, and 17 other states saw a significant decline in 4th grade reading. And as many of you know, Illinois schools receive annual accountability designations: exemplary, commendable, lowest performing, or underperforming. We may be working with some of you to change some of those designation names, with schools in the last two categories eligible for a 4-year improvement cycle supported by additional federal funding and other state assistance. There's some good news right here in Springfield. The report card shows 7 elementary schools in Springfield, District 186, have moved up to the commendable rating, which means that 25 of the district schools have earned commendable rating. I hope some of this information, if not all of it, serves as encouragement for the next push. The information you will hear from Robin and from the panel, I hope continues to push all of you as well. I know it will help motivate me, the rest of our board, and our agency as we work to try to support you. As I've said before to many of you, I feel deeply committed to and engaged with the work that's happening across the state, which I know only happens because of the work you do. I know that the state board, while it always is really attempting to be able to support the work you do, sometimes isn't doing that. And you telling me and you telling our leadership the fact that that's happening is actually something we really welcome. So I just encourage you always to feel free to reach out and say, this isn't working, we could be doing this better, help us out. We will be there to try to do that. The bottom line, information is critical and essential as a flashlight that will help illuminate what's working, what's not, and where we need to spend precious and scarce time, money, and energy. So again, I just want to thank Advance Illinois for inviting me here, thank all of you for being here, and now I'd like to introduce somebody who really needs no introduction, one of my favorite people in the world, who has an energy and passion that could not even be stopped by a flat tire this morning, and that is Robin Staines, the leader of Advance Illinois.
Why do we do this? Advance Illinois has been putting out, the state we're in, a report on public education in Illinois for 11 years now. And this is, the first edition wasn't with all the data. This is our 5th edition with all these data metrics. And the reason is simple. People ask all the time, how are we doing? They want to know. Nobody cares about any issue any more than about how we're doing by way of the next generation. But that's not actually a simple question to answer, particularly when you consider you've got to know something about early childhood, about K-12, about higher education. So what we did was we thought, you know, we ought to talk to some experts, and we'll tell you we have an advisory. Every time we do this, we have a fancy pants group of advisors who help us identify the measures we should be paying attention to. And then we look at, and we've crept up to 80 metrics. And in the back of the report that you all have, you'll see those data tables. And you'll see that on those 80 metrics, we take a look at how Illinois is doing. We take a look at how we've been doing over time. How were we doing on that measure 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Then we look and we see, how do we compare to other states? How do we look compared to the nation? And then not just what is our ranking, but what's the best in class state doing? Because that tells us something about how far off the mark. You know, you could be 30th on something, but only a point or two behind because it's a tight field. Or you could be 10th on something and actually quite far behind what the marker is doing. And then we also pay attention to how students are doing by income, by race, by English language learning, and special education status. So we try to take as broad-based a look. If you don't see one of those things in there, it's because we don't have it, or we can't find it. And one of the things that was particularly, I will say fun, this is probably the wrong word to use, but the first time we did this, there were a lot of blanks. There were a lot of things the state should have known that you should know as educators, as parents, as people who are running colleges or early childhood centers, that we simply didn't know. And one of the things I'm really delighted about is that 10 years later, so that became one of the things Advance Illinois, along with many others, started to work on. Let's fill those gaps in. We didn't even used to know how many kids needed remedial education when they hit the higher education system. We did not know. I'm a former high school teacher. That's kind of crazy to me that we didn't know as we were sending kids to the next step how many needed help. How many, was it that 15% needed it in everything? Or was it that 50% of students needed it just in math? Because those are very different problems then that you are going to put energy against solving and addressing at the high school level. So we filled that gap and a lot of other ones, and I'll try to spotlight a few of those as we go. But that's why we do this, because you can't make decisions if you don't have good information. And that's not information we want to have, that's information we all need to have. And so that's also why we're really happy to be here. We really appreciate Harry, you're hosting us. Harry has been a longtime board member of Advance Illinois, but before that was doing so many good things in higher education. So it's a particular pleasure, and I know has been involved in the collaborative effort here in Springfield. So thank you for having us and for showing up, and here we go. I have one more thing to say. Oh, the other thing that we do is we do take a look. Because it's so much information, 80 metrics is a lot. And so then if you read 80 and say, okay, I've read all 80, how are we doing again? It helps to summarize a few things. So we do take a look at, if you pull together all of the measures where we've got a national window into how we're doing, how does that shake out and how does that average out? And we'll give you a sense of that as we go forward. We look at that not just in terms of student outcomes, but we also look at the learning conditions. And what we mean by that is what's the level of funding, what's the level of access. In K-12, that gets into things like teacher-student ratios, counselor-student ratios, the degree to which we're able to match the diversity of our students with the diversity of our teachers, things like that. So we try to peel that back a little bit. And then we also this year are paying attention to how we compare to how other states are doing and making sure that all children are achieving at equivalent rates. So we also have an equity ranking. How are we doing on that issue? So these are the people that we enlisted this time around to help us take a fresh look at our measures and metrics. I think if you'll see, it really is a smarty pants group. It's a technical term. But we've got folks from higher ed, we've got researchers, early childhood, lots of folks from K-12, and Jennifer Garrison was one of those folks, so a particular shout out and thank you for the help. Paul Zavitkowski from UIC was another one. We want to thank you, Paul, as well. I always feel better when Paul thinks something makes sense, just to feel a little bit tighter on that. So why does this even matter? So the state's goal is 60 by 25, and you already heard Harry mention that, but let me emphasize that. What the state has said is that we want 60% of the adult population to have some form of post-secondary credential or degree. Could be a technical certificate, could be a 2-year, could be a 4-year, by the year 2025. Why? That's not a number out of the hat. It's because that's where the jobs are. Any study you look at, and it moves a little bit here and there year to year, but I have not seen any that suggests that fewer than 60% of students will benefit by having some form and some level of post-secondary training or education if they want to get a living wage job. The other reason it matters is every step, and this has not budged for years. One of the questions, I can't speak for others, but maybe show of hands if you hear this a lot, people saying, is post-secondary really worth it? And it's not. Let me be clear, I want to echo what Harry said. Not every kid needs to go, and not every kid ever will. But this hasn't changed, that for every step higher you go on the educational continuum, you are that much more likely to be employed, and you are going to earn more. That hasn't changed for the last 50 or 60 years since they've been paying attention to this measure. So it matters that we help those students who want, and that's their vision, and are capable to go on. The other thing we look at is sort of if we want to get folks to some form of post-secondary credential, you need to care about where you are at every state. I don't know if your eyes help you to do this. So what you can do is you should have an executive summary in your report. And if you pull out the executive summary, this ladder is there, and you can just have that in front of you while I'm marching through. And I think you'll find that helpful. That's the teacher in me wanting you to have it, but not before I was ready for you to have it. And we pay attention to kindergarten readiness, 4th grade reading, 8th grade math, high school graduation rate, the college and career ready skills that our high school graduates have, then the number of students who are going on to enroll in post-secondary and who then complete. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you quickly up the ladder, let you know how we're doing now, how we were doing 5 years ago, and then we're going to dive into early childhood a little more depth, K-12 a little more depth, post-secondary. So first things first. Kindergarten readiness is one of the things that we didn't know anything about 10 years ago. We couldn't tell you how we were doing. We were investing and actually doing a decently good job as a state, investing in our little kids and making sure that more students, particularly low-income students, had pre-kindergarten options. But we couldn't say how they were doing as they started kindergarten. The first time as a state that we had a window into where our students were academically, and frankly, we only had it academically, was 3rd grade. And I think many of you know that's awfully late in the game to have information in a global way about how students are going. So we now have kindergarten readiness information that tells us something about students' academic readiness as they enter, but also their developmental, their social and emotional development. And just lest you be worried that kids are taking pencil and paper tests, these are observational assessments that are done by students. They're developmentally appropriate. And what we see is that 26% of our students are entering kindergarten ready across those developmental domains. We'll talk more about that in a minute. 4th grade reading by grade level at 3rd or 4th grade, any educator, and there are a lot of educators in the room here, you know this is a powerhouse indicator. There may not be an indicator that is a more direct relationship to how successful you are going to be along the educational road than whether you've hit this mark. We're at 35%. 5 years ago, we were at 34%. 10 years ago, we were at 31 or 32%. So the progress is there, and more on that to come. 8th grade math is a window into whether our students are entering high school with the skills that they're going to need to be successful. We actually just have updated information, as Darren mentioned. We're at 34% now. This was based on what was available when we went to press. 5 years ago, we were at 36%, but 10 years ago, we were, I believe, at 30%. And the 36% was a blip. So we were sort of marching along. There was a blip, and then we sort of marched back. So again, there's been some progress. High school graduation rate, we typically do well. We typically are in the top 15 in the country for our graduation rate. We're at 8. We just goosed up again from 85% to 86%. That's something to be proud of. One of the things, unfortunately, is that there are still some gaps between, not everybody is graduating at equivalent rates. What's nice is that our Black population and Latinx population are really catching up. And so we're really seeing that gap narrow in graduation rates, which is critical. College and career readiness. So these are the numbers of students who are getting college-ready scores, used to be on the ACT and now on the SAT. And you'll see it's held remarkably steady at 38%. Now, what's interesting about us is we were a universal ACT state, we're a universal SAT state. What that means is all children are taking it. While it's a college placement exam, and it's one that's used for, a college entrance exam, Illinois was one of the early states to say, everybody ought to have that and the state ought to pay for it. We want every kid to have a college entrance exam in their back pocket if they want to go. And so when we look at how we compare to other states, we try to compare ourselves only to states that are universal SAT and ACT. And I'm forgetting this number off the top of my head. It's in your data tables. But we have historically actually done quite well. So as one of the few states having everybody do this, we actually perform well compared to other states where everybody is doing it. That said, we've been sort of stuck there at 38%. But I want to do some math with you. And I am not a math person. But 38% times 86% gets you to about 32%, meaning 32% of students are graduating high school with the college skills and career skills you'd want them to have. And I think you're going to start to hear a pattern here, that our schools are working for about a third of our students. A third of our students are getting where we want them to go, and that's true as you keep going up the ladder. We've got more students entering post-secondary. That's great news. We're up to 53%. And we've got more who are completing, 36%. And those numbers will go up as all these below ones. But you'll notice the completion number, 36%, eerily similar. So what you're seeing is we are not going to get an outsized result at any one of these ladders without doing the work at the ladder below and the ladder below and the ladder below. 45% of our overall adult population has a post-secondary degree or credential, and you may say, how is that possible? We were at 36%. How did we get to 45%? Two ways. One, we're actually an attractive state. We get some amount of in-migration of folks who are here, coming here for work, who are bringing those credentials with them. But a bigger piece of that, and I can't tell you the exact numbers because our data doesn't let me do that, are that there are adults who return. People don't stop. These are the ladders of people who are going straight through, by and large. But we have more people who may stop out for some reason. They need to get a job, they're raising a family, that they may go back to school and then add some credentials from there. So we're making progress. But let's dig into that. And I also want a frame of reference. We're making that progress under a set of circumstances that is worth understanding, because Illinois has not been static during the last 5 years or 10 years. We have two changes. One, we have more students coming from low-income families now in our schools and our districts. Over half of the schools in the state now have a significant proportion of students who are from low-income families. Also, the demographics in our school has changed. If you look on the right-hand side here. So the white population used to be at 50%, has dropped to 48%. The black population has also dropped. Fastest growing one for a while now, most of you know this and are aware, is the Latinx population, which has really swelled. And it's much more diverse and spread out across districts. And therefore, and in addition to that, the number of students who are English language learners has really changed over the last 10 years. And the number of schools and districts with significant numbers of students who are English language learners has also changed. So the progress that we're making is in the face of the fact that we've got very different student population that we're serving, which is why, if you listened closely to Darren, that was a lot of statistics to take in. Mine are too, but I've got charts, is that we held steady in some places or have made modest gains where a lot of states have actually fallen back, because the kinds of demographic changes you see here almost perfectly mirror what we're seeing around the country. Almost perfectly mirror what we're seeing around the country. The difference is that even when we've got a more high-need student population, we have continued to either hold steady or gain ground, and that is something worth cheering. And I'm going to give you a little bit more good news on that in just a minute. The other piece of background information that's worth noting is funding. I know it is not lost on anybody here that we've had more than a few funding challenges, and we even went a few years without a budget. We're not going to hold our elected officials responsible for that. We know you were not responsible. You know, you were fighting for the budget bill. But here's the toll that took. Look at on the left, you've got early childhood. So these are state-funded pre-K numbers. And on the right, you've got public four-year funding. Look what happened. We were 24th 10 years ago in terms of how much money the state was putting into that. We're 24th now, which doesn't sound so bad, but look at the dip. We took some very serious hits, which means during those years we lost seats. Students were not in pre-K that otherwise would have been in pre-K, that they're now in your schools and they're now in your districts. And we're going to pay a price for that for a very long time to come. So it's great that we're clawing it back. If we'd had another year of data, because it's lagging information, that would have crept up a little bit more, I'm confident. Higher ed, I think it would have been slightly better, but look at that. We were 19th in the nation 10 years ago in terms of how well we were supporting our public 4 years. And we scrubbed that number because we couldn't believe it. 45th in 10 short years. Now that would have rebounded if we had more recent information, but that's shocking. And you're going to see that pay off in a couple of ways. And let me point out the most obvious, which is for both early childhood and higher education, that creates huge access and affordability challenges. The amount of income for a family to get their kid into a pre-K program, if they were paying for it, or to go to either a community college or a four-year institution, particularly if you're living in or near poverty, is at least half of your take-home pay. And so a lot of people are going to have to opt out. And we're going to see that play out in some of the later statistics here too. So it's important to understand that ground level. But because I promised you good news, this is maybe where you want to eat some tiramisu. Maybe a little bite, maybe a little nibble. But there's a little more coming, so don't eat it all. But I got a bit of good news. So we're not doing, this is the picture for early childhood and higher ed. There's our bright spot, K-12. So K-12 got serious. And I'm going to give Andy Manar his credit on this. Senator Manar lots of people get credit. He gets an outsized lion-sized share of this credit. But the state got serious. So we were 45th in the nation in terms of how well the state was supporting the amount that of its share of K-12 education. And in 10 years, and really you'll see most of that was in the last 5 years, we moved to 24th. That is unheard of. It's because we got serious. We made it a priority, we did something big, and we have stuck with it. And that should be one of the positive takeaways I'm going to come back to at the end. There is some tough news here. And I tend to be a glass half full, very, Pollyannish. Those of you who have worked with me and know me know that. But I don't want to mistake that cheeriness that I try to bring to the momentum and what we can get done for confusion about the fact that we've got a lot to do. But this is why I stay positive. And it's sort of the challenge to all of us, that we can just roll over and accept this, or we can realize that's what we can get done when we get serious and when we focus and when we work together. So, moving on. The funding, but one more nice thing. You're just feeling so good about this, Senator. I mean, look what you helped do. So this is us before the evidence-based funding formula went in. And you'll notice in 3 short years, we've managed to drop from 168 schools below 60% funded to 34 schools below 60% funded. Woohoo! That is not easy to do. That is great news. Here's the bad news. Get your forks ready. Half of our districts are still below 70% funded. And let me just translate that for you. That means half of our schools have thousands and thousands of dollars per pupil less than they need to meet their kids' needs. Thousands and thousands of dollars. These aren't a few hundred here and there. Thousands. So we've got a lot of work still to do. And we've made progress. We can do this, but we're not done. Springfield and Decatur, in case you're wondering, just to pick 2 from the area, and I'm going to use Springfield and Decatur. I know there are a lot of other places. I should have probably done Bunker Hill. Don't get mad at me. I'll show it to you later. Springfield's at 62% funded. Decatur's at 70% funded. So this is very real, this issue, very real here. All right, now we're going to dig in. That was the landscape. That was all the background. Now we're going to dig into early childhood a little bit. So if you look at the conditions under which we're working, how much funding is there? What access do families have? We're 27th in the nation. And this is for a state that prides itself on its early childhood push. I can't tell you how we compare on outcomes, because while we do have a kindergarten readiness measure, there is no common kindergarten readiness measure that's used across the state. Over 30 states now, it may even be 35 now, to have some measure, some way of understanding the readiness of their students as they enter kindergarten. We were a little bit late to that party, but we're there now. The problem is it's not comparable, so I can't tell you how it compares. I can tell you 26% I don't think is what anybody would want. And let me tell you that I'm concerned about that 26% for 2 other reasons. One, that while 26% are ready across all 3 domains, 39% are not demonstrating readiness on any of them. 39% are not demonstrating ready on any of them. And the other thing that's really disturbing, though it doesn't surprise anybody who does this work, but it's worth more people really understanding it, is look at the gaps that are already in place as kids are entering kindergarten. Practically day 1 of school, and we're already leaving behind Black students, Latinx students, low-income students. The other thing I want to point out is we've got some gaps. The way we do our early childhood funding needs the same kind of attention that K-12 funding got, so there's a challenge for us, because one of the things that we do is we give it out in RFP. What that means is some people get money, some people get everything that they need, some people even get a little more that they need, and some get nothing, which means we've got deserts. We've got places with the birth to 5. This is just 3 and 4-year-olds, which looks better. If this were all birth to 5, there'd be a lot more red. You can go online, you can go on the regional analysis, you can see what your number is, but just to give you a little window into that, Decatur, 78% of your low-income students have 3 and 4-year-old kindergarten, and in Springfield, that's 96%. But here's the thing, what I don't know and what the data don't tell me, but we should know, is how many of those are half day and how many of those are full day, because the upside you get if your kid's in the full day, pre-K, is significantly better. So we've got work to do. We've got work to do. Say we're in K-12. Conditions, we're 25th, right in the middle of the pack. I want to remind you, we are the 5th largest economy in the country. We are a wealthy state. There is no reason for us to be 25th on anything. We are right in the middle of the pack on conditions. I am pleased to see that we outperform on the outcomes. We're 22nd. We're a little ahead of the norm. So that means our outcomes outperform our conditions. That's because we got a lot of hardworking, smart-working people there. Some of you are in this room. Thank you. Equity, though, is a problem. We're 31st. That means a lot of states have figured out better than we have so far how to bring all kids along. And so we've got some real work to do, and you're going to see that's a theme. But let's break that down. Here's another bit of good news. We are in the top 10 in the country in terms of how rapid, the amount of progress our students are making between 3rd grade and 8th grade. This is the amount of progress. We're 6th in the country in terms of the progress our kids make between 3rd and 8th grade in math. So you should be getting 5 years of growth. We get over 5 years of growth, close to 5.1 in math, which is phenomenal. But here's the problem. It's not even. 4 out of 10 districts are beating the state averages or the state median. 6 out of 10 are not. If you want to know whether yours is or not, you can go on the regional analysis. I'll give you a little window. Decatur, you're at 3.9, Springfield 4.7 in terms of the amount of growth that your students are making during those 5 years. Here's the other thing. So, and by the way, we're also in the top 10 for the progress in reading. So both reading and math, top 10 for growth. Big plug for Illinois. But here's the problem. Can you guys see the shaded area here? If you're in the shade, you are below proficiency, meaning you're below the grade level marker that you want to be hitting. So there's good news and bad news in the same chart. The good news is you can see the amount of growth. Our Asian students, 6.5 years of growth in 5 years' time. And the really bright spot here is our Latinx students are making 5 years, 4 months growth in that 5-year time period. One of the strongest performing groups in the state, which is great to see. But tragically, they're still in the gray zone. Because they're starting off, if you look at where kids are starting, they're sufficiently far behind that even that outsized growth, even making more progress than you might expect, even making more than a year gain, they're not hitting the proficiency mark, which is why you can have these two charts side by side, that we look so good on growth nationally, but we're 30th in the nation in terms of our math proficiency. 6th in terms of growth, 32nd in proficiency, which again suggests we've got some work to do in those early years. Another factor that we're dealing with, and I won't dwell, I think this is well known to folks, we've got significant teacher shortage. Teacher shortages come, teacher shortages go, but this has been a particularly acute one. It's different in kind. It requires a different response from the state. But the other piece of it is not just the numbers, because we can send money through the K-12 formula, go team, but we got to be able to spend the money on the teachers and the counselors that we need. And if they're simply not available, that's not going to get us where we need to go. And the other piece of that is that we need to make sure the diversity of our teaching population matches the diversity of our student population. Research is clear that having a teacher of color, for any student, not even just the students of color, is an advantage, and students do better. So post-secondary, and I'm almost done. Conditions, 28th, that's not good. We're outperforming it though. We're 15th in terms of the outcomes, means the completion rates, et cetera. And our equity, 42nd. And let me break that down for you. So again, there's a theme here. We've got more students completing post-secondary. That's particularly true in community colleges, which really moved. That's important because about 60% of our students who are in public higher ed are in our community college system. Sometimes people don't know that. And we're seeing, but here's what you're seeing. You're seeing that you've got big gaps in the completion rates. So you have community colleges, 4-year publics, 4-year privates, 4-year privates for profits, and you'll notice there's a huge difference between Black, Latino, and white students in no matter what kind of institution that they're in. So that's not good news. That's a tiramisu bite. But then I've got a broccoli bite. Actually, I like broccoli. I don't know what's a liver bite. Liver is good for you, right? No, but does anybody like liver? Doesn't matter. Every group Black students, Latinx students, white students, all better educated today than they were in 2000. They're making it further along the educational continuum. No matter what background, what race, we're getting kids further. That is really news we're celebrating. The bad news is you can see there are still very significant gaps, and those gaps actually widened. They actually widened. The other thing that I think is very much top of mind with folks, direct relationship, I have no doubt, to the budget issue, though it's always hard to untangle the many things that are going into it. Look at what happened to enrollment in public higher education here in Illinois. It has plummeted. Plummeted. It's way, way down. All right, so that's the last thing I'm going to say. The regional analysis is there if you want to take a look at it. And then the last is our just very quick takeaways. Equity, 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 equity. It's got to work for everyone. 35%, not good enough. the kinds of gaps we're seeing across groups by income, by race, not good enough. We do need to start early. We've got to care about the learning conditions, which is access, which is the funding, which is the kind of teachers that we're making available. And then on the hopeful note, if we focus on the right things, if we have a plan and we stay with it, we can do it. We can make real progress. So on that hopeful note, what I want to do is invite our panelists to come up and join me. I'm going to introduce them as they come. Dr. Jennifer Garrison is the superintendent of Vandalia Community Unit High School. And I almost want to say she needs no recognition because she is so involved in so many directions in this state. She serves on the Board of Higher Education now. She was one of the leading stalwart superintendents in the effort to fix the funding formula. She's got the battle scars to prove it. She's also now got an in-depth understanding of how the formula works that very few people have or want to have. And on top of that, if you didn't know that, you were in the reserve, right? Was it Army Reserve? Yeah, the National Guard. So if you didn't know she was tough from a lot of other reasons, you just, when she asks you to do something, you should just quietly do it, I think is the answer to that. I also want to welcome up Terence Jordan. Terence Jordan is a principal of Blackhawk Elementary School here in Springfield. He's a native Mississippian, but he's been here for a long, long time. He's been in Springfield Public Schools for 18 years. He has been a principal for, is it 8 of those years? 6. 6 of those years. It just feels like 8. Probably feels like more, actually. And we're really delighted to have him here today to give us a school-level perspective on this information and whether it reflects what you're experiencing at the school level. But then last and definitely not least, Senator Andy Manar, who's the youngest of anything he's ever done. Were you the youngest mayor youngest mayor, youngest was, youngest chief of staff to the Senate president, youngest, I don't know. And he still looks 12, by the way. I mean, at some point, he's not going to be the youngest. He's the state senator from this area. He hails from Bunker Hill. What people may or may not know is he actually started his professional life as a teacher, which I think what a gift that would have been to his students, and what a gift it is for us that means it has a special place in his heart. And that as he does this work, all right, stay with me, folks, stay with me, because I'm saying nice things about someone who really deserves it. It means that he comes to this work and that this is a priority. And to have somebody of Senator Manar's incredible capabilities, heart and brains, with a special place in his heart for education and a leadership role to play there has really been a gift for the children of Illinois. It's also been a pleasure just on a personal level to work with you. And if Governor Edgar were here, he would note that Andy was one of the, if not the first, was it the first class of? Second class of Edgar Fellows. And so you've wormed your way in to have a special place in his heart too. So I feel good passing that on. So thank you for joining us. Which means we've got we've got a couple of different vantage points on the group here. I hope you're as intimidated by them as I am. And Andy, I'm going to start with you only because you've probably got the broadest. I know, you're all okay. They're all trembling just a little bit. I don't know if you can see that. Also, on your cards, okay, camera's rolling. On your table, by the way, there are cards. You can write a question down, you can wave it around, they will bring it up to me, and I will ask it. So with that in mind, I'm going to start, though, with a couple of starting questions while you guys get your act together. The first is, I know you've read this closely several times. It sits on your bedside table, and you'll probably continue to read it. What jumped out at you? You've been paying a lot of attention for this. What jumped out at you from the report?
So I think, first of all, Robin, thank you for leading the discussion. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I think one thing that jumps out at me has been said a couple of times now, and that is we've come so far in, honestly, a short period of time. But we still have so much work to do that focuses on funding in the state budget. That was a precursor to finally getting the school funding bill passed and signed into law. So it goes without saying, no matter what I think slide you pull up or what slide that we just went through, very quickly and thoroughly, I might add, I think it underscores that we have done so much good work collectively, but we have so much more work to do. Another thing that jumps out at me is that when you look at the funding gap charts, especially that bar chart, the horizontal bar chart, I think we have to, and we can do this now because we have a couple of years under our belts in terms of the impact, the positive impact that both increased funding and a more equitable distribution combined together has had on kids around the state. But I think we can get into how we can do it even better, potentially. I would say, for example, today that the difference between a school district that is 65% funded and 70% funded, that 5% gap is significant, significantly more important to those kids than a school district that's 95% funded to 100% funded. I know that because my 3 kids go to one of those. And I know what that small difference makes exponentially in terms of what is offered to children every day. So I think that's a good place to be. We can have those conversations today because we're not scrapping and fighting just to get as much as we can in the state budget any longer. And I might say, isn't that a great place to be? It really is. That now we're having cooperative, statewide, community-led discussions, and there's a real can-do approach led by the state board, led by the administration, to have honest conversations about how to tackle these things. But we got a ways to go, and I think we have to get further into the formula that exists today and understand what can really start to move.
So let me, one follow-up question before I move on. There's also increasing awareness of the fact that while we've been putting $350 million in, which is a lot, and more than any other sector's been getting, it may not really be enough to get us on pace to the 90% funding level that we really aspire to for all districts. Do you think is it possible for us to sort of raise that trajectory? And don't we also need to be paying attention to the early childhood and the higher ed when you consider where they've been doing? And can we do all of that? We've got some ongoing fiscal challenges as a state. What's doable? What should our expectations be?
Yeah, those are big questions. I would say, yeah, the answer is yes, we have to. That would be my answer. We can't, as a community in the state, as leaders, whether you're an elected official, you're a principal, superintendent, you're in higher ed, you're in early childhood, can't accept what we just went through. It's not acceptable. We can do better, and if we can all agree that that can improve, then we can lay the groundwork for how we get that into the finish line, across the finish line, down the street here. There were moments during the K through 12 debate where I myself said there's no way this is ever going to happen. But it happened because people stayed focused. There was grassroots support for it. We need to take that type of effort, capitalizing, I think, on what has been established by the administration as a priority for the Pritzker administration, and figure out how we can best utilize resources to address all of the things that we just saw.
So Jennifer, I want to move to you, and I definitely want to know what jumps out at you at the report, but I also want to know if what you're seeing here, if this data, if that reflects the experience as you see it play out in Vandalia.
So what surprises me, Senator Manar, and you've already talked about, is the chart that shows it takes 50% of a student from poverty, or a family from poverty, 50% of their income for early childhood and higher education. So that's for access to early childhood and higher education. So obviously we have an access problem. But when we look at K-12, we have a lot to celebrate when we look at the chart. But for Vandalia specifically, we've moved from 58% to 61%. What has that specifically meant for Vandalia? We finally have a balanced budget. We were deficit spending about $500,000. We now have over $13 million in debt, which we must pay off, which is coming 100% from our taxpayers. So with my school board, which I have 2 school board members with me today, we are thinking outside of the box of other revenue sources to give taxpayer relief. So not only are we looking at how we're investing into our students, but we're also looking at our community as a whole. So what the additional money has meant is paying off, or plugging the budget hole, so the $500,000 each year, and lowering elementary class size. Where are we headed next? We're working on our strategic plan. We're looking at an instructional coach, curriculum director, and then also more social emotional support, which I'll get into further in our discussion.
So, and let me ask a similar question, Terence, of you in terms of sort of one of the things that surprises you or jumps out at you from the report. And again, how does this reflect the experience from the school level?
Well, one of the things that surprises me is that it's statewide that only a third of our students are coming to school kindergarten ready. I see that every year. You know, about a third of my students come to school kindergarten ready. And it also surprises me that we're making growth during the K through 5 or K-12 years, but the gap is still wide. So we're not working hard enough to close the gap, the achievement gap, while our kids are at school. So that's one of the things that surprised me, that gap starts before kids get to school, but by the time they graduate, that gap is still there.
And as you, from a school level, because I think it feels very different on the school level, as dollars are flowing, and Springfield's been one of those recipients, so a good number of new dollars have flown to Springfield. How have you felt that difference at the school level?
Well, at the school level, the only way that I've felt the difference is my numbers in the school have gone down, but my resources have remained the same. So that's good. That's a good thing. So we're not losing resource because our attendance is going down. Now, on the district level, I can't really speak to how.
So as Jennifer, as you see this too, I mean, again, it's easy when you're in the K-12 space to sort of focus on K-12, but obviously directly impacted by how students are coming in to the schools in your district, but also what's available to students as they leave. So it doesn't surprise me that kind of, you're struck by that. It's probably less familiar. We're going to have some hard decisions as a state in terms of the deployment. Like, how do you balance the energy, effort, and dollars into early childhood versus K-12 versus post-secondary? Someone who's living in one piece of that. Yeah. Any way you're on the Board of Higher Education, you run a district. How do you balance that from any vantage point you want?
Being recently appointed to the Illinois Board of Higher Education, I've been really digging into, I'll be quite honest, the funding formula for higher education and early childhood. When we look at our pre-K dollars, as far as pre-K for all, it's 100% grant funded. And I know that we could use, even in Vandalia and Fayette County and our surrounding areas, we could do a better job with how those grant dollars are given to us. And I have to think, Senator Manar, I think, made one of the best points. I'm going to bring up shade structures if that's okay. Like pre-K has so many mandates that we were building shade structures all over central southern Illinois as a mandate in our pre-K grant, when we could use that same money to hire another preschool teacher. So looking at pre-K and how we develop a more equitable formula, the same with higher education. So we have the tools and the whereabouts to do it. I'm wondering why I'm on IBHE if that's where we're headed, but obviously that's part of our goal, that we need to look at a more equitable funding formula for both early childhood and higher ed with K-12, so there's potential to reinvest our current dollars instead of just adding more revenue all the time.
So I want to switch one of the topics we weren't able to get into in the presentation, but I think it's really deep in the report, and I know it's top of mind for all three of you, which is the pipeline for teachers and for principals. That we've got one of the more profound teacher shortages we've seen, different in kind. And I guess let me start with you, Terence, and move my way left. How are you experiencing that in Springfield? How's that showing up or not?
Well, we are experiencing it. If you look on our district website now, there are teacher jobs open right now for the school district. So, and at my school particularly, at elementary school, we're hiring up until school starts. Now that we have a lot of people retiring over the next couple of years, we're already trying to plan ahead for that as well. So we start early trying to recruit teachers because there is a huge teacher shortage. And we're feeling the effects of it right here in Springfield.
And do you, as you look at this, go ahead, Jennifer, how is it showing up, and sort of what ideas are emerging as you are trying to grapple with getting more teachers in the door?
So locally, Vandalia is blessed that we are the county seat. Our salary schedule already meets the minimum salary requirement, so over $40,000, but we're still experiencing a teacher shortage. Right now I have a long-term substitute who are working on emergency licensure and special education. We have waves of retirements for our veteran teachers the next 2 years. So I'm actively looking for people in our community, hoping that at the state level, we're gonna have alternative routes to certification, because I have individuals in Vandalia and Fayette County that hold a bachelor's degree, that becoming a teacher is their dream now, but there's no path for them to pursue. So really that short-term solution is how can we work with ISBE and IBAG on those alternative routes to certification for our paraprofessionals, looking at competency-based. I mean, that's going more to the state perspective again, but we have to balance the short-term solutions with the long-term solutions, because we're losing another generations of kids yet again, because it is an equity issue when I have a substitute teaching any student every day.
And as you're looking at this from the state point of view, Senator Manar, do you think that the General Assembly is sufficiently aware of how critical this issue is and is prepared to take some actions, and sort of how is your own thinking starting to shape up?
Yeah, so if you look at what we've done in the legislature in recent years, there's been a flurry of bills that get at kind of the bureaucratic process of licensure, to reciprocity with other states, functions at the State Board of Education, all the way up to the bill that I sponsored, which establishes a minimum salary for teachers. What I think, so I do think everyone's aware of it. I do. I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago, but I think my colleagues on both sides of the aisle from all parts of the state, even in parts of the state where it may not be as profound as others, are aware of the depth of the challenge. There's much attention paid to the issue. What I think would do the legislature well in the coming year is to focus on two things. Number one, I think the state government needs to change its mindset in terms of the teacher shortage, just like it does for a manufacturing job. So for example, the state government says to manufacturers, you need training, you need some type of a skill for someone to run a machine. We're going to help you do that. We're going to help you do that. So this is career preparedness. It's just a public sector job. It's not somebody making something on a machine. The state government should view this problem the same way it does when a manufacturer needs help retraining its workers, number one. Number two, we have a flurry of programs, some more effective than others in the state budget, that try to, in various ways, address the teacher shortage. And I think it would do us well if we brought all those together and tried to align those programs so that they're not overlapping in some cases, so they're not competing against each other in some cases, so that we can utilize every dollar devoted to those programs in a very effective way. So treat the teacher shortage just like we would workforce development in the state of Illinois. Just because it's a public sector job doesn't mean that it shouldn't have that type of treatment from state government. And dive into the budget, particularly programs in higher education. How can we better support those? How can we align those to get better outcomes?
And you do start to feel like there are some win-wins here, right? We need to ramp up funding and enrollment in higher education, even as we need more folks to come into teaching and find new and creative ways. You feel like there's a marriage that's somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think there is. And if you finding ways to tie the out-migration of students. You know, our enrollment, the chart showed that our enrollment has gone down 150,000 students in higher ed in the state. There are students that left the state to go enroll in an education program somewhere else. So we need to find synergies there, and we need to invest more, especially in public universities that have successful programs for licensure. That's a win-win, I think, for the state.
Okay. A question from, I hope I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, Brad Pullinan from Riverton. As early childhood education has been identified as a priority and research shows its benefits, specifically in low-income communities, what is anticipated for advocating and ultimately increasing funding to provide communities that need it with greater support for young children and their families? This is really the theme that jumps up. And so, again, I'd probably start with you, Senator, like what's it going to take to really drive that home and to sustain it without it cannibalizing the work that needs to be done at the other levels?
Yeah, and I think the last point that you just made, Robin, is so important. So as we look forward, I think we have to look at this holistically. We can't pump every dollar we have into K through 12 without some recognition of what that does to all of the data we just went through for higher ed and early childhood. So we have to find a balance there. My own personal opinion for early childhood started to form during the transition for Governor Pritzker when it became overly apparent that the lack of coordinated data to some degree helped, or I guess doesn't help give us a clear path on how to do what we do right now better, and then what we can do if there's additional resources. I think we need, frankly, to maybe not do a complete reset, but we need to really sink our time and effort into figuring out how the billions that we spend on early childhood could be used better, targeted towards specific districts that need the help, and then come up with a formula to distribute resources for additional money, again, for districts that need the help. To go back to Terence's point, so that schools that have those students walking in with that gap established before they even say the Pledge of Allegiance one time in school, they're behind. How do we target those resources? That's going to take a major effort on the part of a lot of people, but I think the time's come.
So, Terence, I'm going to start with you on this, but Dale Chapman asked, and I love this question, and it's speaking to the role of technology and particularly access, its role both educationally, training for careers in technology, and then the use of technology in buildings and in districts, particularly in rural areas. It's going to play out differently, I think, Terence, for you than Jennifer for you, but let's start with that. Like, how is that? That feels like something that people are all over the map on. What's the role of technology in Blackhawk, in Springfield? Do you think we're hitting it the right way, or where's the room for improvement?
I think we're doing a fabulous job here in Springfield. My school is a Title I school, so we do have federal funding. I use a lot of that, well, not a lot of, but I use a portion of that funding to make sure that we have 21st century technology. Like right now, my school, every student has their own iPad that they use daily in the classrooms. We have Apple TVs. We have all the technology that the kids are experiencing outside of school. You know, because in the world that we are today, kids are tech savvy. You know, we need to use technology as a way for teaching and a way to keep them involved and to teach them how to use technology and dig deeper in research. But also it's important to train our teachers in that area too. So I make sure that we provide adequate training and professional development for our teachers in that area as well.
And do you have a full-time, do you have someone either at your school or in the district that manages technology, that's there to troubleshoot?
Yes, we have a technology manager that comes around to the different schools. If we have any issues with some of our technology, they'll come around and correct those. But we also have a teacher that's a tech leader in the school. So they go get training from the tech people and come bring that back to the school. So we do a pretty good job with technology, but there are always room to improve because technology is ever changing. I think one of the challenges is once you invest in technology, you might as well get ready to keep investing because it becomes extinct pretty quick. So if you're going to allocate some of your budget towards that, you need to make sure you're planning ahead and staying one step ahead, because there's nothing worse than waiting until the technology is extinct before you update it. So you have to stay a step ahead.
So Jennifer, it's obviously a different situation in Vandalia. How, technology, is the connectivity there? Is the access there? It's obviously also a funding and a staffing issue.
Yes, so
Talk
we
to us a little
actually
bit.
have fiber running to one of our buildings right now. So as far as access, but we were able to do that through an Illinois grant. We were involved in that, I believe. So thank you, Senator Manar. Senator Manar and this.
Do you just want to give them your dessert now? Just give them the whole
Yes.
tiramisu. Get the whole extra one.
But I mean, it's true. I mean, it's being bored, I think is the word, currently as we speak. Brian, you could correct me if I'm wrong, it's okay. But I know it is a critical, access, Wi-Fi. I mean, I had a first grade teacher talking to me at a committee meeting last night about the unreliability of our Wi-Fi. So we do have the devices, but it's the connectivity, the dependability that we're still struggling. And again, Vandalia is fortunate compared to some of our other rural schools and what we do have. So we have one-to-one in our junior high and our high school. We have Chromebook carts for our elementary school. But I agree with what Terence said. It's really about how we're using that technology as a tool. I mean, it's not the end all be all. It's a tool for us as educators.
You know, one of the things that's actually up for discussion now is we are a little bit behind the curve in, you know, is computer science. Should that be a requirement? How do we work that into the curriculum? Are we at a tipping point now? And I want to pause on that because Darren mentioned a statistic, and I want to back it up. It's also in your data tables that 45% of students now are in CTE programs, career and technical education programs, which is a huge shift for the state in a relatively short period of time, and that marks, you know, close to 300,000 students. And I'm just, again, I feel like that we're on a collision course with, you know, computers are more and more part of our life. They're more and more sort of available and part of the background noise, and is that something we ought to be looking at as a state? So, Andy?
So I was reminded, Robin, during your presentation that many of you in this room have heard me say this before, but I feel compelled to say it as we go through this statistic. In particular, also with early childhood, but we can't, you know, the proponents of school funding reform made the point along the way that we can't have some school districts that are the best in the world that do 100% of what they're supposed to, and some that don't because they don't have the funding to do it, put those in the same bucket and call it success. That's not success. So I would say if we were to dig into this CTE statistic, for example, the 45%, I think we would see some districts that do this incredibly well, that have good relationships with community colleges and employers, that have an ecosystem built to open up these career pathways to students. Those are going to tend to be the better funded school districts. And then you have a whole bunch of school districts that just have a deficit. And so you put those two things together and we end up with 45%. And so I would just impress on everyone, we have to look deeper than just sometimes statewide statistics. So the answer to the question is an obvious yes. And that's going to take, frankly, everyone to think outside of their norms. I mean, if we're going to take CTE to where it needs to go to meet the needs of employers and the economy, to meet the needs of students, and to meet the funding benchmarks in front of the legislature, that's going to require institutions, both at the K through 12 level, at the community college level, and at the university level, to do things that they usually feel are uncomfortable. But that's what it's going to take, and no amount of money is going to fix that, by the way. So we can do this, and I think this is a big, big opportunity for the state. If you look at the economic development plan that was released by DCO a couple weeks ago, this is a focus of that plan. So we have a good opportunity, but it's going to require the legislature to do different things too. But it's going to require all of us to kind of rethink some of the norms so that we can offer more opportunities to students.
So I'm gonna hit the last question is going to you, Terence, which is probably against my trying to get you to say how happy you were to do this. But I think I forgot to mention that Terence was honored at a statewide event that was honoring excellence in leadership across the state. I think you walked a red carpet and everything. I don't know if people actually threw flowers at you. I'm buttering you up for the question, Terence. Because it's a hard one, because I think the one thing we haven't followed up on here, and I think was one of the most profound themes from the report and from the data, is the fact that we've got pretty serious equity gaps, that we are leaving too many children behind. And I know that's something that is a real issue in Springfield and a real issue in Blackhawk, and I don't doubt for a minute that it's something you spend a lot of time thinking about. So it's an entirely unfair question, but what thoughts do you have? You've got a lot of educators across the continuum here that we ought to be thinking about as we consider that challenge of how to do a better job making sure that we are meeting the needs of every student and giving them an equal opportunity to thrive out in the world.
That's actually a good question. And I have my beliefs on that and my ideas. I feel that we need to do a better job of finding these kids before they start school. You know, we need to build facilities in the neighborhood where the gaps are coming from. I think oftentimes we expect the low-income families and minority families to come get what they need from us. We need to give them and put it where they can have access to it. Also, we were celebrating how much growth that, where we ranked and the amount of growth from kindergarten through 12th grade. But growth does not equal proficiency. And so, and as we noted in the presentation, that the gap has remained the same from before school, preschool, all the way through 12th grade. So we need to figure out how can we give the people who have less more. That's what equity means to me. So what are we doing during the school day to provide more for those students? Because we know what we're doing is working because we can celebrate growth. But what can we do to get those kids more who are underperforming and that are not reaching proficiency? Does that mean they have a longer school day or more programs after school that's geared towards them that eliminate barriers? Now, don't get me wrong, we do have quality after school program, but there are still barriers that exist, like transportation. Often my population of students live blocks away from my school. So those are the kids that are behind, and those are the kids that need the programs, but there are still barriers that prevents them from getting them.
Well, and I know you've put a lot of effort into after-school activity. That's something that you actually is one of the many reasons you've been recognized for excellence, I know.
And one more issue that was not brought up is that achievement gap is wise during the summer. Because think about it. The kids that didn't come to school prepared, that means that they weren't read to at home, they didn't have adequate books at home. So when they get to school, we work hard all year, show all this growth, they go home for 2 months. They're not read to, they don't have the resources at home, so they come back behind where they were. So we have to start over again. So we need high quality summer programs. Campus for Kids, I know Molly's over there, her program is geared towards that. We need more programs like that are specifically for those kids that are underperforming. We need to stop thinking about what it's going to look like in the media, that we're targeting minority or underperforming kids, and stop thinking about what the middle class is going to say, because we're putting a lot of money into helping the lower income kids. And we need to do it. The gap is not closed.
And we all ultimately benefit. When everybody does well, that lifts individuals, that lifts families, communities, and ultimately the state, the economy that we all depend on. So that is a perfect note to close on. And I want to close with just a couple more thank yous. First, please join me in thanking this panel. They are as good looking as they are talented, and I really appreciate their time. And there are a couple of other folks that I owe a thank you to before we disband. First of all, the Advance Illinois team. This report doesn't exist without them. This event, you don't get served. There's no food. There's not this presentation. Thank you. And I don't have my glasses on, but is that Niall? Is that now the head of the Illinois Board of Higher Education is here? And I apologize, I don't know if we got mentioned earlier, but I'm delighted you're here. And I neglected to thank Mike Curry, who was a member of our advisory council for this report. So if you think that it's snappy and well done and thorough, be sure to give an extra thank to Mike on his way out. You can wave, Mike, and thanks, folks. And I also should have mentioned that in addition to Harry Berman, who's a longtime board member, we have another longtime Advance Illinois board member here who also co-chairs the Educator Advisory Council for Advance Illinois, and that's Rebecca Wattleworth, who herself is a distinguished, highly awarded and recognized teacher here in Illinois. And I don't know where Rebecca's seating, but oh, there you are. You can raise your hand, and thank you. So with that, I don't know if I turn it over. I think what I do is just say thank you so much for being here. Please take your report home, share it with everybody. Oh, and fill out, because it's really short, but help us do this better. We're going to be doing this in other places around the state. You can help us make it even better. Pay it forward and fill out a really quick exit slip and give us just a little bit of feedback. In the meantime, thank you, and to the panel, thank you.